At 94 years old, Clint Eastwood did something no one thought imaginable. He directed his 42nd film. It was praised by critics as his best effort in 10 years. But behind the scenes, music, he was struggling with a loss that affected everything. His Snorts longtime partner had just passed away without warning. His son later, music, claimed he was doing okay, but the words felt guarded. Snorts, then came a bizarre interview that Eastwood himself branded utterly false. Something deeper was happening. And when the truth finally came out, it explained why this might be the last time we ever hear from him. Clint Snorts Eastwood joined the world on May 31, 1930 in San Francisco. And his stature caught people's attention right away. He weighed 11 pounds 6 So the nurses called him Samson before anyone even filled out the papers. His parents, Clinton Sr. and Ruth, carried him home to Oakland's Lake Merritt area, seeking to construct a solid life even while the Great Depression kept changing their plans. His father worked as a bond salesman at first and eventually found a long-term path with Georgia Pacific, while his mother stayed home till the children grew older and then joined IBM as a clerk. Clint grew up with one sibling, his younger sister Jean, and the family moved from town to town during the 1930s, chasing opportunities as the economy struggled. These early shifts felt like survival at the time. Yet years later, that story would be warped in a way no one predicted. Snorts, Clint talked about poverty and sounded like someone who had experienced suffering for decades. He leaned into the narrative of a hard childhood influenced by the Depression. That perception was then completely shattered by Sandra Lockcatch, music, who shared his home from 1975 to 1989. She described how the family finally made Piedmont, one of Northern California's wealthiest communities, their home in 1940. They had a private swimming pool, a country club membership, and enough money for every family member to drive their own car. It created a shock because very few families in 1940s America had even one car, let alone several. They were never impoverished, Lacka stated rather bluntly. That truth impacted the fiction Clint loved to tell about himself. Yet the contrast between early uncertainty and teenage privilege, music, quietly shaped the way he moved through the world. Even with the comfort around him, Clint rebelled against school every step of the way. Almost nothing else mattered to him except automobiles, ladies, and alcohol. He was held back one full grade in middle school. When he started Piedmont High in January 1945, the restlessness only grew stronger. He was expelled within a year for a variety of careless actions, such as writing an offensive message on the scoreboard, setting someone on fire in effigy, and riding his bicycle across a wet sports field until the grass was destroyed. He had a ducktail haircut, leather jackets, lanky limbs, and was already 6 feet 4 inches tall. He transferred to music, Oakland Technical High School and finally graduated on February 2, 1949. Through all of it, the only subjects that actually attracted his attention were music and mechanical work. The year 1949 became even more defining when his parents and sister packed up and moved to Seattle. Clint stayed behind in California at 18, choosing independence over comfort. While the rest of the family settled into a new life in the Pacific Northwest, he found jobs wherever he could. He worked as a firefighter, a golf caddy, and a lifeguard, floating through Oakland, music, and adjacent communities with no obvious direction, but lots of determination. That choice to remain in California positioned him exactly where he needed to be for what was ahead. Only 2 years later, in 1951, he was drafted into the Army and sent to Fort Worth as a swimming instructor. A Universal Studios employee spotted him on the base, and that moment, almost accidental, became Snorts, the first spark of a Hollywood future. Even though the Eastwood family had money by the time they reached Piedmont, the memories of all the past relocations stuck with Clint. He adopted his father's focused approach to work. He learned from Ruth's transformation from homemaker to corporate clerk. He understood how easily stability might evaporate and how hard someone had to work to keep it stable. These subtle teachings influenced his belief in efficiency even before he stepped onto a film set. Later, when he became known for shooting films quickly, quietly, and under budget, he credited that mindset to the values formed during the Depression years. Even though Clint never experienced the poverty he publicly talked about, things changed once more on September 30, 1951, when the 21-year-old Clint boarded a Navy plane after seeing his sweetheart in Seattle. As many soldiers did at the time, he had worn his uniform to receive a complimentary military passenger ride, music. After departing Sandpoint Naval Air Station, the Douglas AD-1Q Skyraider made its way to California. What began as a regular lift evolved into a fight for survival. Clint was served stateside during the Korean War, working as a swimming teacher at Fort where he had never seen action. Yet on that evening, his near-death experience came, music, from the sky rather than the battlefield. At 18:25 hours, everything inside the airplane began to fail. The radio system died, cutting off all communication. Moments later, the oxygen system failed, too, leaving the pilot and passenger gasping as the altitude crushed down on them. The navigation system went dark, so the pilot had no working equipment to assist him while dense fog drifted across the coast. Even the communication between the cockpit and Clint's seat became silent. The companion aircraft disappeared into the haze, and the fuel drained faster than expected. The pilot was forced to ditch the Skyraider into the chilly Pacific about 2 miles offshore since the tanks were empty by the time the aircraft arrived in the waters off Point Reyes, music. The landing was harsh but upright, giving Clint and Lieutenant Francis Anderson just enough time to flee into the frigid water. They inflated 2 rafts and paddled away from the sinking airplane, which plunged around 150 feet into the ocean and vanished. Strong currents pulled the men apart until Clint was alone, fighting his way toward a faint lighthouse light on the distant shore. He swam and rowed through frigid water for nearly an hour, his arms burning, his body shivering. But moving forward was the only choice. When he reached land, he wandered inland until he found the RCA radio station at Point Reyes. The station operator later reported Clint looked bewildered and barely able to communicate. Years later, when Captain Chesley Sullenberger hesitated to authorize a movie about his 2009 Hudson River landing, everything changed the instant he learned that Clint Eastwood had survived a similar disaster in 1951. That mutual understanding broke down Sullenberger's reluctance. Because of their relationship, Clint was able to add an authenticity, music, to the 2016 movie Sully that only someone who had experienced frigid water encircling their body could comprehend. Additionally, the collision changed Clint's course in unexpected ways. Before the event, he was planned for foreign deployment to Korea. By the time the music paperwork cleared, there had been delays due to the investigation and subsequent medical exams. His deployment had been canceled. Many young troops sent that year never returned home. Instead, Clint remained at Fort or as a lifeguard for the duration of his service, the same expertise that kept him alive in the Pacific. His awareness of danger and mortality was intensified by that experience, which he later reflected in his acting and directing roles. After leaving the service, he went into Hollywood with no map and very little money. He dug, snorts, swimming pools. He was a garbage truck driver. He tried LA City College, but left to focus on performing. His snorts cameos in movies like 1955's Revenge of the Creature were brief and uncredited. Then on October 23, 1955, Universal Studios dropped him totally. His noticeable Adam's apple, halting speech, and chipped teeth made him appear strange, according to executives, snorts. For the snorts next 3 years, he floated through the industry, wondering if the door to acting would ever reopen. When Charles Marcus Warren cast him as Rowdy Yates in Rawhide in 1958, everything changed. The show aired on January 9, 1959 and became Clint's first stable employment. At the outset, he made roughly $700 to $750 per episode. Not much by today's standards, but enough to relieve his ongoing financial burden. Millions of spectators welcomed him into their living rooms every Friday night. His pay increased to almost $100,000 annually as the seasons went by. But he still felt boxed in. Rowdy Yates was forthright, devoted, and full of energy. Yet, snorts, Clint knew there was more inside him waiting for a role that would let him explore it. By 1965, snorts and music, Rawhide began to unravel. In an effort to save money that summer, CBS let go of Eric Fleming and a number of cast members, musicians. Fleming, snorts, claimed in public that he was making $220,000 that year, but several people thought he was lying. Clint took over as Trail's new boss, but CBS gave him no pay increase. He was unhappy and felt the show had lost its rhythm. Then the network made a hazardous scheduling move, relocating Rawhide to Tuesday nights where it faced heavy competition. In December 1965, CBS canceled the show after just 13 episodes starring Clint. Fleming died the next year on September 28, 1966 while filming in Peru, throwing a melancholy shadow over the show's history. What makes this era even more extraordinary is that Clint almost missed the opportunity that would change his life. During a break, music, between seasons 6 and 7, Italian filmmaker Sergio Leone requested him for a tiny western filming in Spain. Clint wasn't especially excited. He was focused on golf and didn't see much potential in the offer. Only $15,000 was paid. The director didn't speak English. The movie appeared to be more of an experiment than a professional decision. He took the job mostly out of curiosity. He had no idea how close this moment came to slipping away. Leone had, music, first asked Eric Fleming, who rejected because he earned significantly more on Rawhide. Charles Bronson read the script and rejected it as the worst he had ever seen. Richard Harrison also declined, but he recognized Clint from a low-budget western and recommended him. That single suggestion transformed Hollywood history. A clutch of dollars was recorded on a modest $200,000 budget near Madrid. Crew members were unpaid at times and even removed the set's windows in protest. The was released on September 12, 1964 in Italy and blew past every estimate, grossing $19.9 million worldwide. No one told Clint any of this until weeks later. He didn't realize that a movie he approached casually had just transformed his career. Success, music, grew swiftly. The second film, for a few dollars extra, cost $600,000 to make and earned $15 million. Clint's income jumped to $50,000. When Leone prepared the final film, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Clint hesitated again. The director nearly replaced him with Bronson, music, but Clint returned after being paid $250,000 plus 10% of the Western box office, music, revenues. That picture made $38.9 million globally. And by the time, music, the trilogy ended, he had become a worldwide celebrity. Clint likes to dwell, music, on how easy he could have missed all of it. If he had chosen golf over that vacation to Spain, he might have stayed a TV side character, earning $700 an episode. Snorts, rather, the anonymous man presented him to audiences in a manner that Rawhide was never able to. Snorts, his silence, his stillness, and the keen stare in his eyes were his characteristics. A style that inspired decades of movies. By 1968, the stats told everything. He received $1 million for Coogan's Bluff, $750,000 for Where Eagles Dare, and $400,000 plus a quarter of the total revenues for Hangam High. He moved from making $15,000 each picture to over $1 million in just 4 years. One of the most spectacular wage hikes Hollywood has ever seen. Dirty Harry premiered in theaters on December 23, 1971, and the timing alone made folks anxious. Northern California was still living under the shadow of the Zodiac Killer, a real murderer who had shot, stabbed, and scared, music, the region between 1968 and 1969. At least 5 persons were verified killed, with the final known death happening on October 11, 1969 when cab driver Paul, music, Stein was shot in San Francisco. Police could only confirm 5 deaths, but the Zodiac had filled newspapers with insulting letters boasting about killing 37. By late 1971, investigators had nothing. No arrest, music, no suspect, no name. Suddenly, viewers were seated in dimly lit theaters while a fake police officer pursued Scorpio, a murderer who was obviously inspired by Zodiac, complete with sporadic acts of violence and derisive remarks to the media. The chill came from knowing that on film, justice was speedy, snorts, yet in real life, the city had been left impotent just 2 years before. That discomfort went straight into the streets. When the 1971 Academy Awards rolled around, protesters, snorts, gathered outside waving posters that said, "Dirty Harry is a rotten pig." The country was already raw. The Kent State shootings were only a year old. Vietnam was ripping the nation apart, and trust in law enforcement was eroding as stories of entrapment, abuse, and corruption dominated the press. Clint Eastwood was openly shouted at during engagements in the Bay Area, especially by feminist groups. Critics argued the film promoted police brutality at the worst conceivable moment. The fury was not only about one movie. It was connected to the still-raging dispute over the 1966 Miranda v. Arizona ruling, which required police to warn detainees of their rights. Conservatives claimed it shielded criminals. Civil rights activists feared unbridled power. Dirty Harry landed squarely in the heart of that crash. The word fascist accompanied the film almost immediately. Much of it centered, music, on the incident at Kezar Stadium where Harry shoots Scorpio in the leg and grinds, music, his foot into the wound to force information about a kidnapped female. Eastwood never, music, denied that the picture breached Miranda rules. Harry doesn't have a warrant to search. He tortures without reading, music, writes. However, the narrative does not allow him to prevail. When the district attorney argues, music, that Scorpio must be released because the evidence was improperly obtained, Harry fires back with a simple inquiry regarding the girl's rights. The response is sharp. The district attorney says his office speaks for her. If Harry would let them. In the end, the system rejects Harry altogether. The killer walks. Harry throws away his badge. The film finishes not with success, but with hatred against both chaos and the law itself. In 1971, the answer to the question of who speaks for victims was unpleasant, thus it struck a nerve. Victims' rights groups barely existed. The National Organization for Victim Assistance would not be created until 1975. The first rape crisis center in the United States opened the same year Dirty Harry premiered. Miranda v. Arizona was still fresh, ruled by a narrow 5-4 vote in 1966, and Congress had already tried and failed to weaken it with a 1968 statute. When Scorpio demanded his $200,000 ransom while a teenage girl suffocated beneath, Harry's query showed a serious vulnerability in the system. The law concentrated on protecting the accused while organized advocacy for victims was still years away. The uproar caused the movie to blow up rather than fade. Dirty Harry grossed $28.1 million at the domestic box office and launched 4 sequels. People irritated by Vietnam, crime, music, and a sense of impotence saw something raw mirrored back at them. One line repeated throughout, often missed, about feeling lucky. Decades later, the meaning of the film was still being disputed. In 2012, exactly 41 years after its premiere, the Library of Congress admitted Dirty Harry to the National Film Registry. The explanation was clear and concise. These movies weren't picked because they were flawless. They are picked because they reflect who Americans were at a moment in time. The same movie previously deemed fascist propaganda was now treasured as a cultural document. While all of that commotion surrounded Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood was quietly constructing something else. In 1971, the same year the film made him a superstar, he directed his debut movie, Play Misty for Me. He shot it in Carmel, California, his hometown, and proved he could manage a story from behind the camera. The success provided him leverage. Throughout the 1970s, he performed and directed at the same time, going through films like High Plains Drifter in 1972, The Eiger Sanction in 1975, and The Outlaw Josie Wales in 1976. By directing himself, he stepped away from being merely a gunman and began investigating remorse, consequence, and moral weight. The cowboy image started to split open. Years later, that lengthy shift paid off. Unforgiven altered everything on March 29, 1993, during the 65th Academy Awards. The film won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director, and Eastwood joined a select fraternity of performers who have directed themselves to a triumph. He was 62 years old. The movie made $159.2 million worldwide on a $14.40 $4 million budget and tore apart the cliches of the Western genre he once helped establish. He dedicated it to the 2 individuals that influenced his early career, Don Siegel and Sergio Leone. Even when he lost Best Music Actor to Al Pacino, the message was clear. Eastwood had rewritten his own legacy. He did it again with even greater vigor a decade later. On February 27, 2005, Million Dollar Baby dominated the 77th Academy Awards, winning Snorts, Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Music, and Best Supporting Actor. The $30 million film grossed $216.8 million globally and beat much fancied competition. Eastwood was everywhere: music, in the project, directing, producing, composing, and acting. When Snorts, he accepted music, Best Director, he was 74 years and 272 days old, making him the oldest person to win the prize at that time. It occurred 12 years after Unforgiven, confirming the former popularity was not a fluke. At an age when most directors slowed down, he was making his most emotionally difficult work. The way he worked contributed to Snorts, his ability to continue working. Eastwood became famous for shooting one take, occasionally two. Actors learned quickly to be ready. There wasn't much practice or constant repetition. He thought that genuine musical conversations only occur once, not after 50 tries. The set stayed calm, budgets, music, stayed low, timelines stayed tight, the performances felt loose and human, not contrived. His method proved that restriction might increase creativity instead of limiting it. Away from the camera, his personal life was just as difficult. Clint Eastwood fathered at least 8 children with 6 different women between 1954 and 1996, with the oldest and youngest being 42 years apart. Several of those children were born while he was married to Maggie Johnson, his wife from 1953 to 1984. One daughter, Kimber, born on June 17, 1964, remained secret for 25 years until it surfaced publicly in July 1989. As his celebrity increased, the reality remained hidden, even though his name was on the birth certificate. During that long marriage, Eastwood lived openly as if he were single. He declared as early as 1963 that he meant to do as he pleased and described affairs as addicting. Maggie Johnson suffered in silence while women passed through his life on studio lots and at acting classes. People around them saw the tension. Some described the marriage as open. Others described music, visible anguish. One affair with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis began in 1959 and lasted roughly 14 years. It produced Kimber. The relationship played out publicly on sets while the marriage remained. Later came the stormy romance with Sandra Lockcatch, which lasted 13 years and resulted in a $70 million lawsuit filed on April 26, 1989. Locke accused Eastwood of betrayal, pressure, and manipulation. She later learned that during the latter years of their relationship, he had surreptitiously fathered 2 children with another woman. A $1.5 million directing contract was used to settle the matter, but it was ultimately exposed as a fraud in court. A jury quickly sided with Lockcatch before another deal concluded the matter. In January 2009, at the age of 78, Clint Eastwood entered the music industry and quietly accomplished something that Hollywood had declared impossible. Snorts, Gran Torino started tiny, opening in just 84 cinemas, almost like a test. The first weekend brought in only $271,720, which seemed modest on paper. Then something shifted. Word spread. The picture blasted outward cinemas and quickly raked in $29 million in its wide opening weekend. That single sum erased his former personal record of $18.1 million from Space Cowboys. What made it even more remarkable was the size of the peril. Gran Torino cost only $33 million to make. By the time its run finished, it had grossed $269.9 million globally, more than 11 times its budget. Each theater averaged $10,337, giving Eastwood the greatest nationwide launch of his entire career as both actor and director. A simple story about an aged Korean War veteran and his Hmong neighbors had bonded well beyond expectations, and it proved that age had nothing to do with relevancy. That momentum carried into an even bigger cultural event a few years later. American Sniper did not sneak into theaters when it debuted in January 2015. It surged through the door. In just its first 4 days, the picture grossed $105.3 million, the highest opening weekend ever recorded for a drama. With a budget of between $58 and $59 million, the global total at the end of its run was $547.7 million. Snorts, that gap made it the second most profitable picture of 2014, trailing only Transformers: Age of Extinction with an estimated profit of $243 million. It became only the 5th R-rated film to reach the $500 million mark and surpassed Saving Private Ryan to become the highest-grossing war movie ever. 6 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, were received for Bradley Cooper's performance as Navy SEAL Chris Kyle. At the same time, the picture generated backlash. During Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, filmmaker Michael Moore publicly attacked the movie, labeling snipers cowards, music, and decrying the rhetoric used toward Iraqis. Praise and fury combined, and the film became impossible to ignore. Just a few years before, Eastwood had already demonstrated he could dominate headlines without a movie at all. On August 30, 2012, at 82 years old, he came onto the platform at the Republican National Convention in Tampa, Florida, and delivered Music, a 12-minute speech that no one saw coming. Instead of a polished presentation, Music, he talked to an empty chair purported to represent President Barack Obama. Nearly 30 million people watched it live. The answer was quick and savage. Roger Ebert considered it, Music, dismal and depressing. Even Republican advisors discreetly regarded it as bizarre and weird. Eastwood did not back down. He later said he was, Music, aiming for folks in the middle, not trying to please anyone on the extremes. The best way to put it was when Jon Stewart joked that the speech showed a version of Obama that only Republicans could see and that didn't resemble reality. The scene became even more bizarre a month later. In September 2012, Eastwood stated the empty chair was never intentional. He said that a stool had been sitting there. Someone kept asking Music if he wanted to sit, and the idea immediately came to him on the spot. He desired contrast. He wanted something unplanned in a room full of rehearsed words. He called it unorthodox, but stated the crowd was excited. His objective was straightforward. Place the chair there and discuss broken promises with Obama. Its mythology was further enhanced by the fact that one of the decade's most talked about political moments resulted from sheer improvisation. Within hours, the response arrived from the White House. On August 31, 2012, President Obama's Twitter account uploaded Music, a photo of him sitting confidently at the cabinet table with 3 words underneath. This seat's taken. By Sunday afternoon, the tweet had been shared 51,400 times, becoming his second most retweeted post ever at that point. Only his May 2012 tweet advocating same-sex marriage had done better. With 61,500 retweets, the simplicity worked without fighting or attacking. The visual, Music, reversed the story and transformed ridicule into a subdued demonstration of power. Away, Music, from cameras and audiences, Eastwood's personal life was moving just as quietly. In 1986, he bought the Mission Ranch Hotel and Restaurant in Carmel by the Sea for roughly $5 million, preventing the 22-acre property from becoming condominiums. That same year, he served as mayor of Carmel, earning just $200 a month. Nearly 30 years later in 2014, he met Christina Sandera, Music, while she was working there as a waitress. Within months, she moved into his home. The two were initially pictured together in June 2014, exiting a Whole Foods in Brentwood, dubbed by tabloids as a mystery woman. His children met her early and liked her immediately, characterizing her as normal and grounded. By design, the relationship remains secret. On February 22, 2015, they made their first formal public appearance at the 87th Academy Awards at the Dolby Theater. That evening, American Sniper was a contender for 6 Oscars. Over the next few years, Sandera appeared beside Eastwood, Music, at select premieres, including Sully in 2016, The 1517 to Paris in 2018, and The Mule later that same year. Their final red carpet moment together happened in November 2019 at AFI Fest honoring Richard Jewell. She didn't try to disguise her age or reality as she walked beside him, her gray hair clearly visible. Then they withdrew from public eye again. The quiet broke, Music, in the most excruciating way. Christina Sandera, Music, unexpectedly passed away at a hospital in Terry County, California, on July 18, 2024, 2 days after turning 61 on July 16. Eastwood, then 94, made a statement the same day calling her a kind, compassionate woman and, Music, said he would miss her very much. Atherosclerotic coronary artery disease was identified as a contributing factor in the death certificate, which subsequently established cardiac arrhythmia as the cause. According to medical research, over 60% of cardiovascular deaths and over 73% of sudden cardiac deaths in those over 35 are caused by coronary artery disease. The timing made the loss extra worse. A birthday had recently passed. A decade together ended without music warning. Months later, in January 2025, Eastwood's music son Scott reported his father was doing okay and hailed him a survivor. He remarked that resilience ran in the family. You do not complain. You do not whine. You just do. That perspective comes from growing up during the Great Depression and living through World War II. By late 2024, sources suggested Eastwood had secretly initiated another relationship, though no identity was ever confirmed. Snort's even mourning did not totally stop his work. At 94, Eastwood directed Juror 2, his 42nd picture as director. The movie premiered at AFI Fest in October 2024 and astonished reviewers with a 92% new score on Rotten Tomatoes from 74 encircled 4 reviews and music, a Metacritic score of 73. Warner Brothers limited the release to fewer than 50 cinemas and never published domestic numbers. Yet the picture still generated $27.3 million overseas on a budget in the mid-30 million level. That accomplishment far exceeded Crime Macho from 2021, which made barely $16.5 million globally. Many critics deemed Juror 2 his strongest music work since American Sniper. Then bewilderment returned. In May 2025, just days before his 95th music birthday on May 31st, an Austrian newspaper published what looked to be an interview where Eastwood attacked modern Hollywood and stated he was preparing another picture. It was widely used by major sources. Eastwood ended it on Snort's June 2, 2025, stating that he had not spoken to any journalists and characterizing the entire conversation as entirely fake. However, fresh music reports appeared in January 2026. Industry insiders stated he was again in pre-production, cited on the Warner Brothers lot, silently, Snort's working. No title, no cast, just rumors. The majority of critics concur that Juror 2 is a far better conclusion than Crime Macho if it turns out to be the last chapter. While it may not feel like a spectacular farewell, it proves that even at 94, Clint Eastwood could still make a smart, insightful film. After more than 7 decades in the profession, that alone feels like a concluding scene scripted completely on his own terms.